Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show for you tonight. Our guest tonight is a real pioneer in the cannabis and hemp industry. And you know me, I don't say that lightly. We have Richard Rose, who pioneered soy products as dairy replacements in the 70s and 80s, and then implemented hemp products starting in 1994. Some of the first, or the first hemp food products, and he developed hulling material. So we'll be talking to Richard Rose. We have an interesting little hemp news segment for you tonight. So stay tuned as we bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first story tonight is from Connecticut. Connecticut's Governor Ned Lamont signed legislation this week, Senate Bill 1201, legalizing adult use of marijuana and regulating its commercial production and sale. Under the law, which takes effect on July 1st, adults ages 21 and older may legally possess up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis flower or an equivalent amount of cannabis concentrates in public, and up to 5 ounces of marijuana in their private residence. State lawmakers are to be commended for enacting model legislation that will move Connecticut forward. This legislation recognizes that the responsible use of marijuana by adults should not be a crime, and that those who carry the stigma of a criminal record for their past use of cannabis should receive relief. Regulating cannabis rather than criminalizing it has proven to be a superior public policy, which is why more and more states are rapidly moving in this direction. Those with past criminal records for activities involving up to 4 ounces of cannabis will have their convictions automatically expunged under Connecticut's new law. Those with convictions for more serious offenses can petition Connecticut's courts to take action. The new law limits the discriminatory actions that employers, hospitals, and others may take against those who test positive for past cannabis exposure. The Act also provides protections for parents and tenants who use cannabis in compliance with the law. The Act also provides protections for parents and tenants who use cannabis in compliance with the law. It mandates that the odor of marijuana alone cannot be used as a basis for police to search an individual, and it prohibits jail time as a penalty for those under the age of 21 who are caught in possession of marijuana. Beginning in October of this year, Connecticut state registered medical cannabis patients will be permitted to home cultivate up to 3 mature and 3 immature marijuana plants. Non-participants in the state's medical cannabis program have to wait until 2023 until they're legally permitted to home cultivate marijuana for their own personal use without any penalties. Marijuana flowers available at retail facilities will be capped at 30% THC, while concentrated products, except vape cartridges, will be capped at 60% THC. Retail sales of cannabis and cannabis products are not anticipated to begin until sometime next year in Connecticut. 18 states and the District of Columbia have enacted adult use legalization laws, with 5 doing so legislatively this year. Voters in South Dakota also passed the legalization law in November 2020, but that measure is the subject of an ongoing legal challenge. In nearby Rhode Island, State Senate approved the legislation to legalize marijuana for adults in the state and regulate its production and retail sales. Rhode Island is an island of prohibition and a sea of legalization, as one of 2 remaining New England states that have yet to pass legalization. The time's now to stop ceding the control and revenue of the marijuana market to surrounding states and unregulated enterprises. Passage of this legislation is also essential in the beginning to repair decades of damage done disproportionately to communities of color. Senate Bill 568 would allow adults 21 and older to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana and to grow up to 6 marijuana plants for personal use. The measure would also facilitate the expungement of past convictions involving up to 2 ounces of marijuana possession. Senate Bill 568 was approved by the Senate by a 29-9 vote and will now head to the House for further consideration. Earlier this week, after a decades-long career in late-night television, Conan O'Brien is retiring, and the host is cutting loose, smoking a joint with famed marijuana enthusiast Seth Rogen on his show this Tuesday. O'Brien was looking for some advice on what to do with his extra free time, and Rogen gave what he described as a, quote, hilariously on-brand recommendation. He said, quote, try smoking a lot of weed for a long time, end quote. Rogen, an actor well known for his brand of cannabis-centric comedy, but also as an advocate of legalization and the owner of the marijuana company Houseplant in Canada, told O'Brien that, quote, you seem like someone who doesn't smoke a lot of weed to me. O'Brien replied, I don't smoke any weed, and it's not a judgment. It's just I don't have any problem with people smoking pot. I think it actually seems to be a fine herb. But the couple times I've tried it, nothing really happened. And so O'Brien says, maybe you were using the wrong stuff. On cue, Rogen pulled out a joint from his shirt pocket and told the host that if he smoked it, it will, quote, it will be great and a weird show, end quote. O'Brien then asked, are you, as a professor of weed, telling me that this is the kind of thing you think I should use, end quote. Rogen replied, quote, I think you should take one hit of that weed and I think you'll have a really good time, end quote. Then, in a moment of late night television history, a joint was lit, puffed, and passed on the TBS program. Anyway, so another milestone. In Missouri activists are launching a new campaign to put marijuana legalization on the 2022 ballot. After the COVID-19 pandemic derailed an earlier effort to place the issue of legalization before voters last year, New Approach Missouri plans to unveil a modified ballot measure within the next couple of weeks. The group successfully qualified a medical cannabis legalization initiative for the 2018 ballot, which was approved by Missouri's voters. Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed legislation into law to expand Texas's compassionate use program, the state's low THC medical cannabis program. Delaware's Governor John Carney signed legislation into law facilitating patients' access to medical cannabis products by expanding the pool of healthcare practitioners eligible to provide authorizations. Our last story tonight is from Australia. The short-term use of cannabis-derived cannabis extracts is safe and effective in patients with chronic insomnia, according to a placebo-controlled data published in the journal Sleep. Australian researchers assessed the use of proprietary sublingual cannabis extract products versus a placebo in 23 subjects with chronic insomnia. The extracts contain percentages of plant-derived THC, CBD, and CBN, as well as various terpenes. Compared to placebo, cannabis extracts were associated with, quote, significantly lower insomnia severity index scores, end quote. The participants received the extracts reported that they fell asleep faster, slept longer, and experienced improved sleep quality. No serious adverse events were reported. The authors concluded, quote, this study's demonstrated that a novel cannabinoid therapy is well tolerated and improves insomnia symptoms and sleep, end quote. Data published in 2018 reported that nighttime inhalation of herbal cannabis was associated with clinically significant improvements in patients with insomnia. Findings of a more recent clinical trial published last year in the British medical journal Supportive and Palliative Care reported that the use of herbal cannabis is associated with an overall, quote, positive effect on maintaining sleep throughout the night, end quote, in older subjects. The authors of the study concluded, quote, medical cannabis patients were less likely to report problems with staying asleep compared with non-medical cannabis patients. These findings may have a large public health impact considering the aging of the population, the relatively high prevalence of sleep problems in this population, along with the increasing use of medical cannabis. End quote. This study, treating insomnia symptoms with medical cannabis, a randomized crossover trial of the efficacy of cannabinoid medicine compared with placebo. It appears in this month's edition of Sleep. That's the end of our hemp news segment tonight. If you or a loved one are looking for a doctor to help you get a medical marijuana permit anywhere in the United States, you can call us at 503 235 4606. That number is 503 235 4606. So give us a call anytime. And right now, we now have an interview with Richard Rose, who, as I said earlier, is a real pioneer in the hemp food industry. So stay tuned for a great interview and help restore hemp. Okay, I would like to introduce Richard Rose. It's an honor to have you on the show, Richard. People often talk about me being a hemp pioneer, and you are one of the original hemp pioneers. You and natural food pioneers, not just in the realm of hemp, but before you ever were involved in hemp, you were involved in vegetarian natural foods. Did you start with Soyrella, a cheese substitute? And how did that start?
Yeah, no, hey, Paul, it's a pleasure to be with you. I've respected you and appreciated your work for decades, seriously. It's an honor to be here with you today. Yeah, I started in 1980 making tofu. Made a bunch of products from tofu, cottage salad, and, like we ended up with over 100. And Le Tofu, tofu ice cream back in the tofuti craze days in the 80s. And then ended up with Tofurella, which was a cheese alternative in 1986. And that took off. That we ended up getting on the Inc. 500 list of 500 fastest growing companies in the U.S. On the strength of selling America's most hated food, tofu, during the Reagan 80s. So that primed me for pivoting to hemp foods in 1994 after 14 years of doing vegan foods out of soybean. What had happened is I realized that hemp seed was almost as nutritious as soybean, which I'd gone through thousands and thousands of tons of making tofu and tofu products. And we had Tofurella, Ricerella, Zero Fat Rella, Almond Rella, and then Veganrella. And so I added Hemprella, an obvious logical line extension, and Hempe Burger, which was a tempeh burger with 10% hemp seed in it, and introduced those in 1994. And that's when we started doing hemp products in the U.S., in Canada.
I see. And those became a really dominant. I remember seeing your Soyrella products in natural food stores often in the 80s and early 90s. And so I think the first time I heard about your product, but I went to an event that Woody Harrelson organized in Lexington, Kentucky. And he had a nacho dip with your Hemprella cheese. And that was the first time I ever really tasted it there. I think it was it's 94, maybe it was 95. Yeah,
probably 95. Yeah, we introduced it in September of 94, fortuitously a month before the DSHEA cutoff, where it grandfathered hemp seed foods in because of that. Yeah, we had from Tofurella, getting on the Inc. 500, we grew 950% in 5 years. And the way we did that was using outsourced everything except our core competencies, which was marketing and product development. So the sales and distribution and production were all outsourced, warehousing, everything, trucking. And we had over 100 distributors and brokers handling our product coast to coast in supermarket chains, natural food stores in the US and Canada. About a third of our business was in Canada, about a third was with Trader Joe's. So when I pivoted to hemp foods, I plugged those into the existing sales and distribution channel, and consequently, within a few months, had it in thousands of stores, the Hempe Burger and the Hemprella.
I see. I see. Yeah, you got it out there before anything else. What is it that convinced you to go into business with soy and tofu to start with? Obviously, health aspects must have had something to do with it.
Yeah, for sure. So I had been vegetarian since 12. I went on a tour of the Spam plant, and they included the slaughterhouse. And yeah, Spam back in Austin, Minnesota, Hormel Star. I was so disgusted by the wholesale mass execution of sentient beings in that slaughterhouse that I emerged from that room a vegetarian. And then about 10 years later, I became vegan in '79, and and by then I'd already been cooking with tofu for years. And it wasn't until I went to Serrata Soy Foods up there in Eugene by you, when I tasted fresh tofu for the first time and suddenly realized that it wasn't supposed to be sour and slimy all this time. All these years I'd been using basically spoiled tofu. So it was such a realization, an epiphany for me that my wife and I bought a tofu shop like with a few weeks later down in Redwood Valley, California, Mendocino County, just north of Ukiah, and started making tofu and ended up doing a lot of Americanized foods using tofu instead of dairy or meat. Sausage and eggnog and cottage cheese and a ton of different stuff and desserts especially. So um, that's how I got into it, and being a vegan, it made sense also, and for me to start making these kinds of foods and for others as well.
Mhm. So, how did you start marketing that? You had a store there in Northern California, and you built that up. I think you said through Trader Joe's into a national product.
Well, so back in 1980, we were in Redwood Valley for 2 years before we moved to Petaluma in Sonoma County, California, and I opened a cafe. So we had a tofu shop, but next to it we had a cafe that I started. Turns out it was the first vegan restaurant in California, and that allowed us to serve all these different things that we were making, and also experiment and try new things out on people. And then we moved to Petaluma and kept making foods. It was in an old poultry plant, and it was on Poultry Street. And Petaluma was once the poultry capital of California.
Okay.
So it was a karmic cleansing for the manufacturing plant at the time by us making tofu there instead of dead animals. And so one thing led to another, and we just were building it and building it slowly. But once we got to the tofu rella product, it was co-packed for us, and that's when I started what is essentially as a virtual. We called it back then a virtual business or company, whereby someone else made products to our specifications, our recipe, put our label on it. And we ran this, multi-million-dollar company out of a spare bedroom and no employees, and we didn't have to get up every day at 4 a.m. to make tofu, and we didn't have to go, be in the car all day visiting stores asking them to carry a product because we use brokers.
It
And
sounds like though you did some of that though. You tried
oh yeah,
out in at 4 a.m. and making tofu and driving around and repping your products, and that
yeah.
got you your start, right?
Yeah, that's how I got started. Redwood Valley was 2 hours from San Francisco, so I had to drive to San Francisco at least once, twice a week. I was doing all the sales. I was calling on all the stores myself. And for 7 years, we were making tofu and doing all the cleanup and production and sales and packaging and with the help of employees, of course. But it was really quite a grind. So I was more than happy to turn the production over to somebody else who was able to do a great job and let us focus on what we did best, which was turned out to be marketing. I went back to university and got a BA in marketing, and then a graduate degree in marketing and international business, master's. So that was really our strength, was in marketing of these new foods. Um, Trader Joe's was a dream account to get, and we did a lot of business with them, and in all the supermarket chains in Canada, and most of them in the U.S. as well.
And I guess Trader Joe's was a lot smaller then than it is now.
It probably is. I haven't been in one in a long time, but yeah, it was back before they sold to the German company, the family that bought them. And I think when we started with them was even before they were on the East Coast. They expanded to the East Coast while we were still supplying them. I ended up selling that company, the Rella company, in 2001 for 3.7 million to my main competitor, Soyakos, which was another brand owned by
You kept
American Natural Snacks, Tree of Life, a big Visan, and a big public Dutch company, multinational. And I was going to dive, push. We were riding a tsunami of momentum at that time for M Foods, and I was going to just surf that tsunami and make it even bigger, better, faster. But HIA sued DEA for legalizing 98% of all hemp products, no max THC, and killed the market for 2.5 years, almost took down Canadian hemp with it. So I said, screw it, and I moved to Amsterdam and retired.
I see. I see. So I am on your list of news. You put out just a ton of news about hemp. So I know you're still following the industry. Uh, Tell us about what you're doing today.
Well, today I do the Richard Rose Report at therichardrosereport.com, and we were doing about 10,000 posts a year. It's down to 2,000 now. I decided to go with quality over quantity. And within a day of new development studies or new interesting and significant developments, it ends up on CannaSearch Daily, which is one of the pages on the Richard Rose Report. And it also goes out in an email to people who want it. It's all a free service. Everything I do, I don't charge unless I consult. And everything, I have over 60 free downloads, mostly original documents. A lot of the tools I use to manage Rella's fast growth business tools are on their spreadsheets and the like. And let's see, there's CannaSearch Daily, where you can, see what's going to be written about in the media in a couple days. You can read about today, and a lot of original articles, over 160 original articles on various aspects of hemp and cannabis. That's all on the Richard Rose Report. I'm still trying to stay retired. Retirement can be a killer if you have no mission and no reason to get up in the morning and raison d'etre. And so I suffered for years not having that mission, and so this keeps me active. It keeps my brain active, and it helps me progress the movement still, the best I can with however I can, still being retired and very far away.
So how is it that you found out about hemp to start with, and found out that hemp compared with soy? And how does hemp compare with soy in terms of protein? My understanding is that soy has more protein, but it's not as digestible as hemp protein for
Yeah.
human consumption, though a cow with four stomachs can digest all the protein in soy. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the raw soybean is marginally, slightly higher in protein than the hemp seed. However, it needs to be processed, and it needs a lot. It has a lot of anti-nutritional factors, trypsin inhibitor, and oligosaccharides, which cause gas. It make people fart. So, and you have to really cook the heck out of soybean to make it edible. And then there's the flavor issue. We spent a lot of time with the tofu products masking that soy flavor, whereas the hemp seed. So in 1996, I'd been working on trying to shell the hemp seed, get the fruit, the nutritious fruit on the inside out from the non-nutritive shell, and that would increase the nutrition overall in a pound of it, say, and make it edible, like the difference between whole sunflower seeds and shelled sunflower seeds. It's that radical of a difference. So I had spent a couple years trying to do that. I was at a trade show in Germany, and I found it. Somebody had beat me to it, and more power to them. So I started buying from them, and I was the first to market shelled hemp seed in North America, U.S. and Canada by years. I called that hemp nut. Today you
Yeah.
call it hemp hearts, but back then hemp nut was the term. Two hemp associations demanded the trademark to it. People were, borrowing, appropriating the trademark right and left. I was told it was too generic to trademark.
I,
Today it's so generic. Today you call it hemp hearts instead of hemp nut.
I've been in
Uh,
a similar situation in that I came up with the term tree free for tree free eco paper for my hemp paper back
right.
in the
I remember.
80s. And now I have no ability to enforce your trademark.
Yeah.
That means if you're like Disney, you go sue everybody who uses Mickey Mouse. I don't
Right.
have this kind of money. So now,
Yeah.
tree
I
free
remember that.
huh?
I remember that. I think we used your paper for a while,
Yeah.
and we used Canaf paper for a year or two also back in the early 90s. Yeah, it, and so, what I had done is I introduced hemp nut. It was pretty radical. I mean, it became hemp's first $1 billion industry, and it's 90% of Canadian hemp today. So it was a huge development. I did it, 3 years before Nativa in Manitoba started, and um, and then I branded the company Hemp Nut Incorporated. So I had, the Hempe Burger, and which had the first FDA legal health claim on a hemp food and for reducing the risk of heart disease, and chocolate chip cookies, and a bar, and a hemp seed oil, and hemp scream, and a bunch of products that were all branded hemp nut. And it had a really kind of a timeless, sophisticated graphic design for the logo and packaging, thanks to Al Hager. And it pioneered the whole idea of perishable, sophisticated, branded hemp foods in stores in U.S. and Canada. And that's the thing I was going to ride the tsunami of. We had probably over 100 million impressions. I spent about $230,000 on PR and advertising, national advertising. I was on the Roseanne Show, an afternoon talk show in '99 on CBS. Jay Leno made jokes about me and my products. We did a zillion radio shows, Mancow and Ted Nugent and Danny Bonaducci and all these radio stars back in the day. We had stories that we got placed in thousands of newspapers and dozens of magazines like Details and Rolling Stone and Better Homes and Gardens and things like that. So it was it was the thing that really sort of introduced the concept that hemp could be a food. Hemp could be eaten and not be about THC, not be about getting stoned or flunking drug tests and the like. And I call it hemp 2.0. Hemp fiber was hemp 1.0 for millennia, and then the next big development was hemp as food, and then CBD, of course, and now smokable hemp. I call hemp 4.0. So, you know, it also having the word hemp in 1 inch, inch and a half high letters with a big neon green hemp leaf on a purple background on thousands of store shelves helped legitimize and normalize hemp and cannabis in the minds of consumers and the trade, so that and in business and food sections, it was the first time cannabis had been discussed in a legitimate way in the newspapers like that. So we did that in '94, and '96 was the vote for Prop 215, and I think that hemp products on the shelf like that did its job at normalizing. I mean, we even had those products in the PX supermarkets at Travis Air Force Base in California.
Wow. So they didn't
Not at
warn
Whole Foods.
about THC.
Whole Foods banned it, actually, but Travis Air Force Base didn't.
I remember you'd often hear soldiers disciplined for using hip seed at first. It was even though I don't think they tested positive for THC at all.
That was started in 1999. There was a case, and that's when the military and law enforcement banned consumption of hemp products. It was in '99.
And that was just independent of any testing or anything. That was just a moral or kind of
No, an airman flunked a drug test, and he blamed it on hemp seed oil, and so he had a plausible deniability, and so he got off, but the hemp foods got banned, and to this day, in the military and law enforcement, anybody that has to pee in a cup.
Right. That's only here in America, right? The rest of the world, they don't pee in cups, right? I remember,
No.
I know you must have known Jack Herr back in the day. I remember Jack always used to say, "This isn't the land of the free; it's the land of the pee. We're the only people in the world that our government or employer demands that we pee in a cup."
Yeah, that's true. It's I mean, here in Europe, I mean, if there's an accident or something, they'll test. But short of that, nobody's peeing in cups outside the U.S. Especially in Europe, it's considered intrusive, a violation of human rights, as well it should be.
Yeah, exactly. It should be. It's definitely not a thing we should have in the land of the free, so to speak. But so how is it you first found out about hemp? How is it that you learned that hemp was so nutritious and you decided to start marketing a product out of it?
I read Chris Conrad's Hemp Lifeline to the Future. So that was the book that opened my eyes. I mean, he had like percent of protein. I go, well, Jesus, that's just a couple percent fewer than soy. And soy. You have to understand that back in the day, soy was like a godsend for vegetarians and vegans.
Yeah.
Today, it's been slagged unfairly, but back then it was all about soy, tofu and soy. And so, to make the pivot from soy to hemp seed um, was a big deal at the time. I mean, I didn't need to do it. It wasn't like I was, had nothing better to do. And it ended up, when I walked away in 2002 from hemp foods and retired, I walked away from $2.5 million investment and 8 years of work by that time. So it 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 needed to happen. Someone needed to do it, and I guess I got chosen by God to do it. But I was able to leverage all of these things I've been working on since 1980 to make it happen. The distribution network, the sales network, the production, and marketing skill and stuff, and turned it into a real thing. And but it was Chris's book that I read. Jack's book, but I wasn't ready.
Jack's book is more like, it's almost, his first book was a cartoon book, and I don't want to say anything bad about that. I mean, we had his son Dan Ehrer on last week, and he actually wrote the first edition of that book in my house way back when. But I remember providing a lot of material to Chris Conrad that he included in later editions of Jack's book. And what I really found is going through the Portland State University Library, the Library of Congress put out a series of books on the 200th anniversary of the birth of Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington. This was their complete correspondence and writing, both incoming and outgoing. And so I just went, all of these were like 20-volume sets I found in the university library. So I just went to the 2-volume index and looked up hemp and Indian hemp. And there were just tons of references, And so I gave those to Chris Conrad. I know it made all of the final chapter of his book, actually, 9 out of 10 of those quotes from Washington and Jefferson and Franklin I found at the PSU library back when. But why is it that you decided to leave, to retire? I mean, you were obviously doing well. You'd sold your business. You had a nest egg. You were continuing to make money in the hemp business. What drove you to retire at that stage?
Well, there was no market. I mean, we were in thousands of stores across the U.S. and Canada, but in the U.S., HIA saw it as a chance to build this new thing they took over from Lloyd Hart called Vote Hemp and turn it into a real lobbying organization. So they needed a bad guy to target, to focus on, to do that. And DEA had just come out with the interpretive rule in 2001. DEA wanted to get hemp off their plate. They didn't want to regulate it. They were trying to get rid of it. And so the interpretive rule was any hemp product not for human consumption was legal. No max THC. It could have any amount of THC, but if it wasn't for consumption, then it was explicitly legal, which is a far better deal than we even have today with 0.3 max THC. So the way hemp foods and hemp products were at the time is they were all imported, right? So they all had to go through customs, U.S. customs. They had to clear customs. And customs had a THC test that had a cutoff of 1%, 1 part per million. So as long as it was below 1 part per million, it was THC free. And we routinely imported and tested and had done so hundreds of times over the years. And very rarely, if at all, it was ever over 1 part per million. So I knew that it was not going to be a big problem for us. Plus, we had a long history of doing it and had a 0 THC policy, which was right on the package and everything, that we tested to validate that and ensure it. And we knew we could accomplish it. At the same time, I was raising $1 million to put into hemp nut from investors, and their first question was always, "Is this legal to DEA?" So for me to be able to say yes, they, in the interpretive rule, they legalized it, and I knew that customs had the 1 part per million cutoff, so I knew I was good to go. The only problem might have been hemp oil and hemp seed oil, and with just a little bit of cleaning, it would not be a problem for hemp seed oil either. So I was more than happy to comply with the interpretive rule and just keep doing the business and raise the money and keep doing what we were doing for years in terms of popularizing hemp foods. But they saw people who didn't have to comply, soap and retail and fiber products and stuff, saw it as an opportunity to make a big public splash and, mean old government fighting the poor old hempsters. So they did that. The market subsequently crashed. If you look at the acres grown in Canada from the years 2001 through 4, it's almost dead. I mean, it was super low. It goes like this and then it goes back up. So
Yeah. We saw something similar. We saw something similar. The advent of hemp in America. Here in Oregon, in particular, hemp in the first year, 2 years ago, where it was legal to grow, I would say it was probably 5 to 10% of all arable land in Oregon was being cultivated for hemp. I drove through the Rogue River Valley down outside of Medford, and hemp was as far as the eye could see, really. And occasionally you'd see the little 1-acre plots in the middle of it of recreational cannabis, but it'd be surrounded by all these people growing hemp flower. And unfortunately, just as in Canada, that led to a huge bust. Many farmers lost their shirt. A few of them committed suicide, unfortunately, because people didn't realize what they have to do to harvest. And then there was a big controversy between hemp growers and cannabis farmers in terms of pollen and the seeding of the crop. And so that got pretty contentious down in Southern Oregon, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yeah, CBD is female. They were all growing for CBD, or almost all growing for CBD, and that they don't want your nasty pollen either. The only ones that need pollen are those of us that want seed, and maybe fiber, but the best fiber is before the seed is really set. So fiber doesn't even necessarily need pollen. Seed does. And flowers for smoking or CBD definitely don't want pollen either. So yeah, it was a mess. I mean, that's why Washington was so slow to get into hemp as well. It was the fear of pollen.
So what are you doing today? Let's talk about what your current work is. And I know you're retired in general, but if someone wanted to hook up with your information and things, what would they do?
Well, come visit me at therichardrosereport.com, and you'll see. You could spend days there looking at what I've put up and download free white papers and financial management tools and see the latest developments. I'm sort of the food guy at this point, so. I helped popularize smokable hemp back in 2015, and CBD with the Medicinal Hemp Association the year before that. But at this point, I'm just trying to get people back onto the food. Hemp should be food. Fiber's nice, but there's a huge infrastructure to be able to utilize that, and there's some other obstacles as well. But food can be incorporated into almost any food processor's production lines overnight. I mean, it would be so easy for hemp foods to be for thousands of new hemp foods to be introduced in a year. It makes everything taste better. It makes the nutrition higher. and it's extremely easy to incorporate. It doesn't have the anti-nutritional factors that soy does, and it could be in virtually any recipe. So I'm still trying to get people to see that light. CBD caught the imagination, and now fiber is catching the imagination. But I'm still just trying to remind people that people eat 2 or 3 times a day, and they only buy jeans every once in a while. They only build houses maybe once in their lifetime, but they eat every day. So food is really hemp's future, and future for sustainability and returns and impact on society and sustainable development goals and food insecurity and there's few things higher and of a calling than feeding people and medicine, sure, but feeding people day in and day out is really it's a sacred path, and I'm trying to get people to see that light.
Well, I agree. I really admire your lifetime of work here. I was so surprised, actually, I gotta say, back in the 90s when I first saw your product, because I was familiar with your Soyrella product. And when I saw you were using hemp, it's like you really broke the ground for the whole industry here. And with your distribution chain already in place, suddenly hemp products were in all these natural food stores that, and as you said, I hadn't considered how that might have impacted Prop 215 back in 1996, the first real effective initiative-driven medical marijuana law. But were you involved in that campaign at all? I know you were in California then.
I was in Santa Rosa and Sebastopol. I wasn't involved in that campaign. I had a Prop 215 victory party at my house, and one of the guys who would later go on to sabotage and slow hemp for the investors in Canadian hemp for years, I turned to him and said, hemp is the sharp point of the legal marijuana legalization spear, and hemp's going to get pot legal. And he took it to heart and slowed down legalization for probably another 13 years by that point, until 2018. What's that?
You want to name that person?
Oh, no, but you might buy his chia seed and coconut oil and hemp seed and CBD today. He was at my house a lot back then, picking my brain before he started his hemp seed company, knocking it off, and even hired my ex-CEO to my last CEO was his first. So, there's I'm not a fan of this particular person.
I know when I first looked at hemp, I first had an AP article that was on the wire like 1989. And in 1989, there were 6 companies importing hemp seed, all of it from China. And it was all going to the bird food industry.
Yeah.
And so they would import it under license to the West Coast, and they would cook it for some period of time to when it was not viable. It was sterile
Right.
at that.
Right.
How did you come across hemp seed that you started experimenting with back then?
Yeah, same. I bought it from the birdseed distributors, from the guys who sold to the birdseed people. That's who I bought it from. It was whole seed back then. It was sterilized pursuant to federal law. And so when I started shelling it, bringing it in shelled in 96, it was technically illegal because I didn't sterilize it. I didn't have a sterilization certificate as part of the import documents. And if they wanted to shut down the industry, they could have grabbed me and thrown me in jail for life because I had brought in tons of it. But they didn't. In 99, Kennex exported seed and other products, fiber products, to the States. And on their export documents out of Canada, they put contains less than 10 parts per million THC, which I told him was an admission under penalty of perjury of importing a Schedule 1 controlled substance in RICO and continuing criminal enterprise volumes. And he ignored it. And a few months later, sure enough, it happened. And that created the whole US hemp embargo canard of 1999 that really wasn't about an embargo. It was because one guy contains less than 10 parts per million THC
And so
on his import docs.
the rule at the time, as you said a moment ago, was 1 part per million or less. And so
Yeah, that's customs. That's their testing. But in terms of your documents, you don't want to mention THC at all because it's a Schedule 1 controlled substance. So and in America, it was technically a zero tolerance land. So if you didn't know and look at and read the customs THC test, you wouldn't know the cutoff was 1 part per million. That was not well known, though. I mean, I knew because I had the document, but still, it was zero tolerance. So if you put on your documents, it contains THC, you're just, it's a red cape in front of a bull for a federal officer. And sure enough, an eagle-eyed customs inspectors caught that and created a huge fiasco. They had to recall, I think, 17 truckloads, and that lost us the birdseed market. Those guys are really conservative, and they don't want to be hearing nothing about DEA. And they just said, screw it, we're not going to use hemp seed anymore. And we lost a 3,000 ton a year market over that.
I see. So you started with the imported Chinese hemp seed as well. When
Yeah.
did you start using other sources? I take it primarily Canadian.
Well, Canada didn't start growing till '98. So, and at that point, I'd already been importing shelled hemp seed for 2 years. So, Canada had this policy I call Canada Uber alles, which was, it was all about Canada. They wanted to drive production in Canada. I was about, you grow it, and if it meets our quality standards, I'll buy it. I don't care where you are. And I'll get it processed. I'll get it shelled or pressed into oil. And so the idea behind that was that it would encourage other nations to legalize and to produce. And if you had quality, I didn't care where you were from, I would buy it. And so consequently, I started buying Chinese whole seed, certified organic by EcoCert, shipping it from Harbin to Hamburg, Germany, where I had it shelled for me by a contract sheller. And then in bulk, he shipped it to Long Beach, California, where I had it packaged in
Wow.
San Diego. So
The globe with that.
What's that?
I did that with a few loads of my hemp paper, but you circled the globe to bring it to the West Coast.
Right, and in so doing, I was able to have to this day, the lowest price for shelled hemp seed in North America. I was selling it. My cost of goods were around $1.40 a pound. So the way shelling works is it takes 2.5 pounds of whole to get 1 pound of shelled. So if you have a lower price on the input seed, your cost of goods on the shelled is going to be substantially lower than everybody else. So I was able to sell it for below the Canadians. I was able to sell organic for below the Canadians' cost of production for non-organic.
Wow, that's a
and
huge.
yeah, well, I thought it was pretty cool because I wanted to disrupt 15% of food soya sales in the U.S. and that would give us about 1 million acres grown. And to do that, my goal was to get the cost of goods down to about $1. today you pay twice what you should, and the South Koreans a few years ago paid half of what North Americans, Canadians, and Americans pay for the same material. But my goal was to compete with soy, not to just have fat margins.
Mhm, mhm. You're a real pioneer, Richard, and I really appreciate your work. We're about running out of time here. What would you like to say in closing?
Eat more hemp.
Yeah,
Eat
yeah,
more hemp. Yeah, come visit the Richard Rose Report. See what I'm doing. If you're in the hemp business, there's a ton of resources there for you. They're all free. I don't charge a penny for any of it, unless you want to talk to me and it's a consulting gig. But I consult. I give advice to people for free all the time. There's even a link on there. We can talk for free and book time and stuff. So. Yeah, eat more hemp. It's really the future for hemp. And certainly one of them, wherever you have seed, you have fiber. So it's not a seed versus fiber deal. It's a seed plus fiber. And we
yeah.
can make
I tell
fiber products as well as feed people. What's
if
that?
it's flour, you still have stems and fiber. And
Yeah.
so we can have this one crop, the hemp grown for seed and the residual flour. When I first started smoking marijuana as an 11-year-old, we used to take the coats off the seeds, because that's I used to as I de-seeded it. And that
Yeah.
was often the best stuff. All the trichromes were piled up
The,
on top of that. We
the
can do that,
bracts.
I think, we can
Yeah.
get all the THC, CBD, CBG, everything by growing a hemp seed crop. And the residual fiber will wipe out world hunger, and the residual fiber will stop deforestation and have just so many beneficial aspects to it. And I appreciate you helping pioneer this. And it's really an honor to have you on our show after all these years.
It's an honor to be with you, Paul. Anytime we want to talk, just let me know.
Well, we'll definitely have you back on in the future. I appreciate your time today. We've been talking to Richard Gross, the founder of Hemprella and Soyrella, and the real pioneer when it comes to hemp food in the world. And thank you again, Richard. Have a
My
good
pleasure. Thanks, Paul. Cheers, everyone.